Sir, that boy lived with me in the orphanage.
Sir, that boy lived with me in the orphanage. The words cut through the soothing music and chatter like thunder on a quiet night. In the ballroom of the Lexington Grand Hotel, every fork stopped in midair. People looked. A young black waitress stood there shaking, holding her plate to her chest, and her brown eyes were wide with amazement. For a short while, no one moved. Then, the billionaire, Xavier Langston, looked up from the polished table, and his keen, calm face showed signs of confusion. Cameras from the charity event flickered in the backdrop, picking up on the tension like carnivores smelling blood. Ilara James, the waitress, took a hesitant breath. In the big room full of white suits and pearls, she seemed little. Her voice broke, but she didn't stop talking. "That boy in the painting," she remarked. "He's not just anyone. He lived with me in the street Augustine's orphanage. His name was Micah. I knew him." The crowd gasped as one. People talked in hushed tones. Some people rolled their eyes. Some people looked at them with disbelief. What could a young black waitress possibly know about the background of the most influential black CEO in the US? But Xavier didn't pay attention to them. The world around him faded away, and the name Micah rang in his head like a ghost pulling chains from 30 years ago. Micah, the boy he used to be, the youngster he had put to rest. He rose up slowly, his well-fitted suit shining in the light, and his face was unreadable. Across the room, Ilara's chest rose and fell quickly, her gaze fixed on his. At that moment, the billion-dollar company, the celebrity, the applause, all of it seemed pointless, because the voice in front of him was from a time he had wanted to forget. This gathering wasn't just a get-together. It was like reopening an old wound. The whispers got louder. The cameras got closer. The crowd smelled something bad. But there was something deeper, a truth that was trying to get back into the light. This is Hidden Worth, and you're seeing a black story that will make you cry and make you believe in people again. Stay to the end. Sometimes, the folks the world doesn't notice are the ones who are most important. People turned their heads when Ilara James walked by, even if it was only for a second, not because she was loud or pushy, but because something about her made me feel warm, for real. The kind of brightness you only see when you've been in the dark for too long. She wasn't very tall, yet she stood with quiet assurance. The warm light from the hotel's chandeliers made her complexion, which was a deep chocolate brown, shimmer. Her deep, soulful eyes always seemed to be looking for something, and they made even strangers feel like they were being observed. And that smile in the sun, it wasn't only pleasing to look at, it was a positive sign. It was the kind of smile that made you think things might still work out. But there was a lifetime of learning how to stay alive behind that smile. Ilara grew up on the south side of Detroit, where there were more empty lots than playgrounds and more broken dreams than broken windows. The dark walls, chilly food, and crumbling ceiling of street. Augustine's orphanage were some of her first memories. She didn't know her parents. She only knew her name and a few other children who shared similar invisible scars. It wasn't easy to live in the system. There was no noise, the kind of calm that makes you feel heavy. But Ilara found methods to get up. She taught the smaller kids how to braid their hair, told them stories at night, and learned early on how to mask her tears while laughing. And she always stayed kind, even when the world gave her every excuse not to. She didn't have a safety net when she turned 18, no family, not much of a plan. First, they worked as busboys, then as waiters, and finally got a job at one of Chicago's most expensive hotels. Some attendees would rather not look her in the eye, but that didn't matter. People said terrible things about her attitude, even though all she did was stand up for herself. She came, grinned, put in more effort than anyone else. She did so out of necessity. There was a waitress. She saw someone who had lived. So when she came into the Lexington Grand Ballroom that night with a tray in her hand and a smile on her face, she didn't expect anything but another lengthy shift, more false laughs, more insults that sound kind but aren't. She didn't expect to see the face of the boy who used to hold her hand during storms. He muttered fantasies about becoming someone strong, someone who would always be remembered. But he was there, or at least a picture of him, and at that instant, everything in her life changed. Ilara James, a waitress, orphan, and survivor, knew that face not from TV or headlines, but from her recollection. The kind of memory that no one can take away from you. The kind of memory that lasts forever, like fire through snow. The Lexington Grand was a venue that was meant to wow. It had polished marble floors, velvet-lined walls, and crystal chandeliers that looked like frozen explosions. It was decked in gold that night. Near the entrance, champagne towers sparkled. People in tuxedos brought silver plates of caviar and truffle nibbles to the tables. The city's elite business tycoons, socialites, and political donors moved through the room as if they controlled the air. Alara passed through them like a ghost. She was one of 12 people who worked for the Langston Foundation at the charity gala. Each server had been carefully chosen for their looks, quietness, and ability to get things done. No talking unless spoken to, no hanging around, and no opinions were all things that were understood but not written down in the job description. As she walked between the tables, filling glasses and changing napkins, the words wafted through the air like perfume. Money, power, real estate deals, and private schools. It was a whole new universe, a world where everyone grinned with their teeth but hid their knives behind their backs. One man asked, "Can we get another bottle, sweetheart?" Without looking at her, he held up an empty wine glass as if it were an order. His date giggled and said something about Alara's exotic features. She smiled like a professional, but inside she felt like she was going to explode. It wasn't new. Some people said things that were funny. Some others talked to her slowly, as if she didn't know how to speak English. Some people didn't even notice her and talked about investing in Africa as if it were a game board to gather. They all wore masks that were clean and courteous, but yet full of judgment. It wasn't the kind of racism that was loud and open. It was the kind that was quieter. The kind that hurts worse because it acts like nothing is wrong. But Alara was also excellent at pretending, acting like you don't see, don't care. She walked with grace, looking ahead, holding her tray steady, and smiling. Then it took place. She turned a corner close to the main stage and halted. The portrait was there, high above the crowd on a gilded easel. It was a boy, perhaps 10 years old, with big, expressive eyes, a beautiful grin, and skin that was the color of warm bronze. Her tray leaned a little. The sign said, "Young Xavier Langston, the beginning." But that wasn't Xavier. Not to her. That was Micah. The boy who once gave her half of his bread when she hadn't eaten in 2 days. The boy who recounted stories about owning skyscrapers and creating schools while they were beneath the same blanket. The boy who left without saying goodbye. Alara saw someone she knew for the first time in years, in a room full of people who didn't see her. Someone who may also remember her. Micah Langston, now known as Xavier, had spent years putting up walls so strong that they kept the past out. But memory has a terrible way of getting through crevices, especially when you don't anticipate it. He was no longer 42 years old when he stood there in the middle of a room full of adulation, reputation, and authority. He wasn't the rich CEO who had been on magazine covers or sat across from presidents. He was Micah again in that one instant when a girl's voice from long ago made him feel that way. Micah, the boy no one remembers in a place no one remembers. Street Augustine's was more than just an orphanage. It was a cage that looked like a safe place. There were worn-down brick walls, flickering corridor lights, and whispers echoing through the cold, deserted halls. The smell of bleach, old wood, and unsaid anguish filled the air. The kind of environment where hugs were limited and dreams were too costly to preserve. He remembered the metal-framed beds, the shoes they all wore, and the hunger not just for food, but for love, safety, and someone to say, "You matter." Most nights, he lay on the cracked ceiling and prayed for someone, anyone, to come fetch him. But no one ever came. Micah was one of the few black boys that lived in the orphanage. And that made things more difficult. The jokes, the punishments, the way some volunteers smiled with pity but held on to their handbags more tightly. He was typically the first person to be accused and the last one to be believed. The beatings weren't the worst part. It was the quiet that came after them. How suffering becomes a part of everyday life, like brushing your teeth or folding your blanket. That was awful. He kept going because of 2 things: the sketchpad he had taken from the art closet, and Alara. She was only a few years younger, but she was smarter in ways that he wasn't. She had a way of making you feel like you were there, even in the dark. They would tell each other their dreams and trade secrets for half a cookie. He showed her how to make stars. She showed him how to get through Mondays. And then, One day, he was gone. Taken in. That's what the nuns said, at least. No farewell. He left without warning. He had a new name, a new life, and a bag that wasn't his. He never looked back. Up until now. Now, the girl from his past was standing in front of him, not in pajamas and ripped socks, but in a server's uniform, shaking with memories of her own. And then, all of a sudden, the walls Xavier had worked so hard to erect fell down. Micah. It was more than just a name. It was a vow. A voice from the past that wouldn't be quiet. As soon as Alara said that, everything inside her changed. She hadn't shouted that name out loud in years, not since the night he went missing. It used to come out of her mouth like a prayer. She thought Micah could do anything at the time, that he was a wizard. If anyone could get out of the gray walls of Street Augustine's, it was him. They were kids, but they really cared about each other. It wasn't founded on blood. It was built on staying alive. She remembered how his chuckle echoed down the corridor when the lights went off, the way he used to draw miniature rockets and stars on the backs of cereal boxes. He informed her he was going to be the first black astronaut, or maybe a CEO, which was a big deal back then. She only knew that he had enormous dreams. Micah informed her once, "I'm not leaving you behind if I make it out of here." But one Tuesday afternoon, he was gone. No heads up, no note. There was only an empty bed and the stark truth that no one ever stayed. She waited for weeks. She hoped for months. It seemed like every car that drew up to the orphanage might bring him back, but none of them did. And over time, like most things at Street Augustine's, the name stopped coming up in discussion. Not claimed, not relevant, but not for her. Micah was more than just a friend. He had kept her safe, her little bit of hope, the one person who didn't see her as a number or a poor black girl, but as Alara. Only Alara. So when she saw that picture at the gala, it wasn't recognition, it was memory. Her heart didn't just skip, it broke. Because she was aware. That face, there was a gentle smile on her face. There was a fire in your eyes. It was him, and it ached. Not because he was alive and well, but because he had never come back. Nonetheless, she moved onward. She wasn't concerned about the cameras, the people watching, or the whispering. The boy in that picture had promised her something, so she said the name, Micah. It felt weird on her lips, like something holy, returning something that was stolen. She had to try, even if she didn't know how he would react or if he would even remember. Names are sometimes the only things that connect us to the individuals we used to be. It didn't happen overnight that Micah Langston became Xavier Langston. It happened in parts. There is a name change here. There is a new address. He received a new suit, a better haircut, and a school uniform that fit him well. It felt as if he was discarding all the aspects of himself that defined who he was. His new parents were Caucasian, rich. At least on the surface, they intend well. They bought him books, signed him up for private school, and nicknamed him Son. But they also told him, in a kind but strong way, that the past was over. "Don't worry about where you came from, Xavier," his adoptive father stated once, giving him scholarship paperwork. "Think about the future. That's all that matters now." And he did it. He learned how to get around in rooms full of people who didn't look like him and thought he was there to fill a diversity quota or make a mistake. He learned how to grin without exhibiting too much emotion. He learned how to play the game, how to talk to them, wear their suits, and make deals with them. And with each success, Micah's light grew dimmer. He didn't completely forget about Street Augustine's, but he buried it very deep, because remembering meant feeling, and to feel meant to break. When you were striving to prove the world wrong, there was no place for breaking. He started with nothing and established an empire. He invested in real estate, tech startups, and made investments globally. He made it onto Forbes' Black Power 50 list when he was 35. He was famous by the time he was 40. Xavier Langston is a billionaire who made his own money. Xavier Langston's success story serves as a much-needed example of a black individual achieving success. But there was a cost to success. He no longer asked questions regarding his past. He stopped thinking about what had happened to the other youngsters at the orphanage. To Alara. He believed that staying alive meant being quiet, that remembering meant being weak, that no one from there would ever want to witness what he had become anyway. until her voice broke through it all. Micah. Only one word, one name. And all of a sudden, the person who had conquered boardrooms and bank vaults was standing naked in a ballroom, as only memory can show. He had gone so far, put in a lot of work. But in his quest to become someone else, he had obliterated the person he used to be. But suddenly she was there, proof that the past didn't just go away. It was alive. It took a breath, and it was kept in mind. Xavier Langston didn't know who he really was for the first time in decades. Xavier or Micah, the youngster who dreamed as it rained, or the man who forgot how to dream at all. The lights in the ballroom had gone out. The visitors had left, but their perfume and talk hung in the air like smoke. However, in a private suite upstairs, the main party was just getting underway. Ilara stood at the window, her hands nervously playing with the hem of her uniform. Security had taken her upstairs, not because they thought she was suspicious, but because they were curious. Xavier Langston had asked to talk to her. By yourself. She didn't know what to expect. Anger? Refusal? He might act as if he didn't know her at all. There was a quiet click when the door opened. Xavier came in, and he was no longer the untouchable CEO. He had taken off his jacket and loosened his tie. The gloss of power had faded into something calmer and more human. They looked at one another for a long second. Your name, he whispered in a low, careful voice. It's Ilara? She nodded her head. Ilara James. He got closer, but not too close. He looked like he was frightened that if he moved too quickly, the delicate object that was hanging in the air between them would break. I didn't think anyone from that time period remembered me. I never forgot, she responded in a gentle voice. You were the only good thing there. His face changed. There was anguish there, regret, maybe even shame. I used to go by Micah, he added, almost as if he wanted to hear it again. But they changed everything after I was adopted. Start over, they said. Now she walked toward him, her voice firm. You told me you'd come back once. He swallowed hard. I know. And you never did. There was a long, heavy silence between them. But it wasn't furious. It was simply filled with the years that had passed without any answers. Ilara said, I thought maybe I made you up. Maybe I made you up to get through it. He said, you didn't. You were real. You were the reason I got through. They talked for an hour, possibly more. They exchanged stories about frigid nights, told stories to each other, the things they did for fun. The time Micah Xavier took peanut butter packets from the kitchen to make her a cake for her birthday. And over time, the years between them began to fade. He said, I don't know who I am anymore. Ilara responded, you're both. You were the boy who kept me safe, and the man who made something out of nothing. She took something folded out of her pocket. It was an old paper star that he had made for her from a page of a book. I kept it, she said softly. All this time. He shook when he took it. Xavier Langston didn't feel lost for the first time in 30 years. He felt like he had been found. The next morning, the city woke up to news stories about the strange woman who confronted Xavier Langston at his party. There was a lot of talk on social media. News sources made guesses. Was it a trick? A stalker? A scandal from the billionaire's history that no one knows about? But the truth was being discreetly and meticulously chased behind closed doors. Xavier had already called. He wasn't going to leave this up to chance, not when he felt like his whole life was changing. He needed to be convinced that Ilara was right and that she really did know him when he was still Micah. He did it for her as well as for himself. In a private medical lab with soft white walls and the slight smell of antiseptic, they sat next to each other. The technician calmly swabbed their cheeks and told them that it could take a few days for the findings to come back. Neither of them said much. Ilara nervously drummed her fingers on the table's edge. Xavier looked at the small test containers with labels on them. His mind was racing with memories and doubts. It seemed bizarre, like a dream. For all these years, he thought his past was over, that it was no longer important. But what now? Now it seemed that everything he had created was built on unstable ground. His legal team was already working outside the lab, getting ready for possible media backlash by writing statements and getting in touch with PR experts. They were worried about how to fix things. Xavier didn't care. He told them, I don't need lawyers for this. I need to know the truth. Ilara didn't want money. She wasn't trying to get attention. She could have easily gone to the press, but she didn't. That meant more to him than any background check could. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly as they left the clinic. He said, "I might owe you everything." They were stuck in limbo for the next few days, waiting. They observed the world attempting to interpret their story. Some news outlets called her a liar. People said she was brave. Some people said that Xavier was hiding something from his past. He didn't pay any attention to them. It was late at night when the call eventually arrived. The doctor's voice on the other end sounded calm and professional, but the words hit me like a thunderclap. "There is a match. As kids, you both spent time in the same care facility. And certainly state records from Street Augustine show that Xavier Langston used to be Micah Taylor." Ilara let out a breath, and her eyes filled with tears. Xavier sat back, his heart racing. The boy was real. The girl had not forgotten, and the truth, after years of stillness, was no longer just a recollection. It was evidence. When the DNA results came back, they confirmed Ilara's account and revealed Xavier's hidden identity. The public response was quick and split. Some people were moved, some people weren't sure, but most were shocked. A week later, the world finally heard Xavier's voice. It wasn't through a press release or a tweet with a filter. It was through a live TV interview that would soon become one of the most watched shows of the year. The interview took place in a quiet studio in the heart of Chicago. There was no audience. The background was devoid of any brightness. There were only 2 chairs, a coffee table, and the weight of a lifetime on both of them. Xavier Langston appeared serene when he sat across from renowned journalist Diane Maddox, but there was a fury inside him. "Why now?" Diane asked, her voice soft yet forceful. Xavier took a deep breath. "I tried to forget who I was for 30 years, and someone reminded me a week ago." He did so without passing judgment. He did not make any demands, just with truth. The camera turned to Ilara, who was sitting next to him. She was there, but she was quiet. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. "What did you think when you first saw her?" Diane asked. He smiled a little. "I was looking at someone I thought I would never see again. Someone who knew a part of myself that I didn't think was still there." Diane leaned in. "What do you say to those who claim this is merely a way to seek attention?" Xavier's smile went away. "I don't need additional attention. I don't need your pity. But there are black and impoverished youngsters in this nation who go through hell without saying anything. And if exposing my experience provides even one of them a voice, then every headline is worth it." Ilara eventually said something. Her voice was steady, clear, and calm. "We didn't come here to relive trauma," she remarked. "We came here to remind people that where you start doesn't have to be where you end, and that everyone, even those who are forgotten by the world, should be remembered." The interview went on for about an hour. They discussed their childhoods, their losses, and the ways in which race and class can cause individuals to conceal their identities. They didn't try to improve the suffering sound. But they didn't stay there either. And after it was over, people all around the US sat in silence. Not because of the scandal. The silence was not due to financial gain. The reason for this is rooted in the fundamental and evident aspects of human nature. The hashtag number Micah and Ilara was popular all around the country that night. But something deeper happened. People began to raise questions. Concerns arose regarding the care of children, about race, about getting a second opportunity. Xavier Langston felt like the truth was louder than the legacy for the first time in a long time. The next morning, the headlines went crazy. "We never knew who Xavier Langston was. From orphan to CEO, the real story of the Langston Empire." Board members angry about CEO's secret past. It wasn't just chatter in the news, it was business conflict. Langston International, the billion-dollar empire Xavier had spent years developing, was more than simply a business for him. It stood for something. Investors thought he was the perfect face for their brand, polished, unbreakable, and exclusive. But now that his past was known, others thought he was weak. Some people perceived a risk. An emergency board meeting was convened within 48 hours. The ambiance in the meeting room on the top level, which looked out over Lake Michigan, was crisp and chilly. 11 board members sat around the mahogany table, all wearing tailored suits and looking serious. Xavier was the last one to arrive, and he didn't bring any notes or a laptop. Preston Avery, the gray-haired chairman and businessman, wasted no time. "Xavier," he said, tapping his pen. "We all saw the interview. You told everyone that Micah Taylor is actually Xavier Langston, an orphan who grew up in a state hospital and didn't have a documented background until lately. Do you know what that disclosure means for your finances and the law?" Xavier looked him in the eye. "I do." Collins, a tech investor and another board member, leaned in. "This business is based on trust, heritage, stability. You've made things unclear. The press is already making guesses. People who invest are asking questions. Some people want you to quit." Xavier didn't move. "Let me be clear. I made this business. From the ground up. Not because of my background, but in spite of it. And if you think it makes me a worse leader, you might not have grasped what this business is all about." The room fell silent. He went on, his voice steady yet strong. "I didn't lie about who I was. I didn't even know the whole story until a week ago. But I told the truth. In public. I was being honest. That's what leaders do, after all." Amara Shields, a younger member of the board, spoke up. "Many people found resonance in your story. After the interview, the stock went up. Maybe being open is a good thing, not a bad thing." Preston frowned. "This isn't about feeling sorry for someone. It's all about control." Xavier leaned in. "Then let's talk about control. Anyone here who thinks they can do what I've done, build, negotiate, and come up with new ideas, while masking who they are, is welcome to try." The stress was electric. Finally, the chairman sighed and looked at the other people. There was no vote. There was no choice. But it was evident that Xavier wasn't just getting through this storm as he got up to depart. He was changing it. Xavier Langston stood in front of the rusty gates of Street Augustine's home for children 2 weeks after the interview and the fight in the boardroom. The paint had come off. There were cracks in the windows. The weeds and stillness had taken over the garden, which used to be beautiful and maintained. But what about the memories? They were quite loud. Ilara stood next to him with her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't say anything on the way there, just continued looking at him with a quiet, knowing look. He muttered gently, as if to himself. "This place looks smaller," she said. "That's because you're not 10 anymore." He let out a breath. They all pushed the gate open at the same time. It made a noise like a voice waking up after a long sleep. The building had been closed for more than 10 years because it didn't have enough money and wasn't taken care of. But parts of their upbringing were still there. The mural in the hallway has lost its color. The piano in the leisure room, that doesn't work. The stairs used to seem like a mountain to climb. Xavier ran his fingers up the railing and saw them for a moment. Kids with worn shoes and empty eyes following dreams that were barely holding together. And he remembered. The cold, the hunger, the fear of being forgotten. But it's also fun. The birthdays that weren't planned. The moments of rebellious happiness they experienced during the intervals between heartbreaks. They got to the old dormitory where they used to sleep. Bunk beds lined the walls, some of which were empty and others still had old blankets on them. Ilara pointed to the corner that was far away. "That was yours." He nodded slowly. He muttered. "It felt like the whole world was in that small space. And all I wanted was to get away." "You did," she said. "But now you're back. Not when I was a youngster, not as a victim. He was a man who made a difference in everything." He looked at her. "I want to buy this place," he murmured. The words came out before he even knew they had. "Bring it back. Turn it into what it was meant to be." Ilara smiled. "For kids like us?" he said again. "For kids like us." They stood on the steps outside the orphanage that night and watched the sky turn into stars. It wasn't merely a feeling of nostalgia. It was a chance to make things right. For Xavier, going back wasn't about staying in suffering. It was about getting power back, writing the story again, beginning a fresh chapter on the same pages that sought to erase him. You have to go back and confront the beginning sometimes to really move forward. And this time, he wasn't trying to get away. He was making something better. Months went by. The headlines went away. The drama in the boardroom died down. The world went on, as it always does. But something lasting had taken root, not in the news or the market, but in the hearts of the people who had lived the story. The Micah Foundation for Hope is the new name for Street Augustines. Xavier Langston paid for everything, and Ilara James co-directed the place that used to break kids, and now promised to build them. There was no silence in the halls. There was laughter. Rooms full of cozy mattresses, literature, and music. The kids established a garden in the backyard and called it Ilara's Patch. It was no longer a home for orphans. It was a safe place. Xavier would come every Sunday, not as a billionaire or CEO, but as a man who used to sleep in those very beds. He would sit on the floor with the kids, tell them stories, answer their questions, draw stars on napkins, and remind them of something that the world often forgets. You are not what happened to you. You are what you decide to be. What did you learn? Pain doesn't stop you from doing anything. It makes you who you are. The world may try to identify you as a foster kid, impoverished, or unloved, but such labels don't matter when you choose who you want to be. People used to make fun of Ilara for her skin color, her background, and her quiet. Now she appeared in front of Congress, calling for changes to foster care, racial equality, and funding programs that matter. Her voice, which used to be tiny and hesitant, was now like thunder. But it wasn't just them. It was about the thousands of kids all around the country who were waiting for someone to notice them, listen to them, have faith in them. It was about getting better. It was about turning pain into knowledge. And it was about never underestimating what someone may become, especially if they had fire in their heart and a reason for their misery. So, when you listen to this narrative right now, think of this. What if you embraced your past and grew from it? Who might you motivate just by living? We at Hidden Worth think that every life is valuable, but especially the ones that people don't notice. If this story touched you, please help us reach more people. This video is excellent. Sign up. Share this video with someone who requires a reminder that light always finds a way. We don't only change tales when we cast a light on what's concealed. We change them. All together.